Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are back again with another Weekly Bite segment. I'm Jeff Policio, the founder of Allied Insight. And this week we have Salesforce versus an ATS. And we're lucky to have Helpstone here to help us get through and navigate those waters. Landon, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here. It's fun to talk with you. I mean, as always, and fun to share here.
Yeah, of course. Give everybody a little bit of background about like who you are, what Helpstone is. Like, give us an understanding of like the foundation here.
Yeah, and I'll try to make this the Reader's Digest version because there's about an hour long version of this too. So I grew up in the world of sales, and early on though in that sales role, I became interested in process automation, systems, and so I was kind of the weird sales guy in the room that was always interested in the tech more than making the next phone call.
Sure.
So eventually got into the recruiting and staffing space as a recruiter and as an account manager. And so again, continued to be in that world of being more interested about the submittal process and how to make it faster than on getting more submittals out the door, which I'm sure my managers loved, but it was just in my blood. And so I had the opportunity to move directly into the world of technology when I joined a company and helped them move on to Salesforce using Job Science as an ATS. Took a role as a lead recruiter, knew that they were implementing the tool, and raised my hand quickly after I got in the door and said, "Can I take this project?" And they're like, "Have it. we don't want it." And
Not a lot of competition for that one, huh?
No. But was able to implement that successfully and kind of prove to myself that I can do that kind of work. And then from there was just a whole series of working on a side project for a while, building a tech tool that took in recruiter and sales notes and through audio, translated them to text and sent an email to you. That never went. That's still kind of a cool idea actually, but it was too early. Actually, it was before Amazon, Echo or all the voice technology came out that made that better.
Sure.
So in any case, really got into that world of tech, and then eventually fully got out of a sales or a recruiting type role and went into directly consulting on Salesforce. Shortly after doing that, I was in that space for about a year, and then had the opportunity to start Helpstone. And so that was 5 years ago, crazy enough. I mean, coming up this October, that started Helpstone, and really started Helpstone based upon the idea of helping staffing companies use Salesforce.
So it's exclusively for staffing, right? Like you don't go outside into other areas or other industries, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Awesome.
We've just stayed focused on that. I guess I'm a big believer in you being able to get more value out of technology if you know the business context.
Sure.
Always.
It certainly helps. It's not an easy environment to navigate if you don't have any experience in staffing, for sure.
No, right. Yeah, there's a whole vernacular that goes with it.
Yeah.
And so we know that. And that's maybe more than you bargained for, but started Helpstone and have grown it. Started with working with Job Science, Talent Rover, and Target Recruit as ATS packages that sat on top of Salesforce, and then moved into using Salesforce natively for recruiting, which is kind of the topic of conversation today. And since then have built a product that helps to enable that. That's kind of an ancillary product, resume parser and viewer. And now it's kind of most of what we do is help clients use Salesforce natively as an ATS.
Oh, that's awesome. And what's the product that you guys created, the parsing tool?
It's called Parsley.
Okay, cool.
And
I assume it's not spelled like the vegetable.
No, it's Parsli.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah,
very cool. And is that in the Salesforce marketplace?
Yeah, it's in the App Exchange. So which was quite an experience to get it through the process. But
I'm sure.
I will tell they curate their tools. So It's there's definitely a lot of security
Lots of
hoops you want to
vetting.
jump through. Yeah. Yep.
This actually stages it great for our first question, which is how practical, and I mean, you've been at this for 5 years, so I assume
Hmm.
practical. So, but how practical is Salesforce in staffing? I mean, we've all been groomed pretty well to the fact that like an ATS is absolutely necessary in order for staffing to be successful in this industry.
Hmm.
So how practical is Salesforce as a solution for staffing?
Well, of course, I'm going to say very practical.
Kind of a
But
softball question.
yeah, but I will give some background. So as I mentioned, when we started Helpstone, we were helping clients who had ATS tools that sat on top of Salesforce. So in that setting, you do have what is very familiar to everyone here around ATS is you have ways to track job orders, you have ways to track applicants as they come through the process, and submittals and interviews and offers, and the automation around that, the ability to search through candidates and reach out to them, get their permission to present them, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's built into those tools that kind of sit on top of the platform, on top of Salesforce. So what really opened my eyes to the idea of just using Salesforce straight up was a project we did about 3 years ago, where a client had had Salesforce for their sales team, which, by the way, a lot of people do have. A lot of staffing firms do have Salesforce for their sales teams,
Just
and then
to handle the business side, like the
yes, the
client
business
side.
development.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. So this particular client had Salesforce on the sales side, and then they'd gone through a whole litany of ATSs over about span of about 6 years. They had Nimble back in the day. They went to Bullhorn for a while, didn't like that. They went to Google Hire. That wasn't working well for the contract side of their business, and of course, they had spreadsheets all over the place too. And so,
When
um,
in doubt, use
yes,
your
exactly.
spreadsheet.
Yes, do not actually.
Right.
No, I always ask about the spreadsheets when we start a project because they are there always. But
Right.
in any case, um, they had this struggle between their sales and their recruiting team because they recruited high end consultants, so people making $300,000-$400,000 a year, and so these people throughout the life cycle of working with them, let's say over a 10-year period, we're
Mm,
very likely to go from being a candidate to being a hiring manager to being a candidate to being a hiring manager, and sometimes even a little bit overlapping between those two, of course. And
sure.
so the problem that they were running into throughout all the time where the kind of the systems were disconnected is that Billy over here would be calling this guy at XYZ company as a hiring manager on the same day that a recruiter was also calling them, not knowing that conversation had happened earlier in the day on the hiring manager level, and then the guy's left going like, well, you guys don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
And
they
this
didn't have that, like, that single point of truth, right? They didn't
Yeah.
have that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, and so what I needed to prove out in that project was, can you effectively build an ATS without job science or talent rover, or these other kind of layers, and the answer was yes. It was reasonably easy, in fact, to build most of the wiring that went into those other tools, and really what was eye opening, or what I thought would be the outcome, and it ended up being the outcome, was that it just helped to free up Salesforce, because it's a great Lego set. I mean, that's what I love about Salesforce. You can build kind of anything, and
Yeah, it's kind
so
of a blank canvas in many regards, right? And you
yes,
can kinda, like, yeah, make the picture that you need.
yep, exactly. So it worked great in that setting, and then we've continued to help clients with that same path since then.
Awesome.
Yes.
So, what should staffing firms be asking about their hub, right? Because what you're really talking about here is making a very large shift from
Hmm.
what would be, quote, conventional wisdom in
Hmm.
staffing to migrate away from an ATS platform and use Salesforce as the main hub. So,
Yeah.
what should we be, we in staffing, what should we be asking of our hubs?
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things that I've really seen, kind of just working in the trenches for as long as I have, is that the word integration gets thrown around really freely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this integrates, that integrates, whatever. And what I've found with integrations, just generally, not just in Salesforce world, but just in the world of IT, is that they're tenuous at best. It's always difficult to integrate on some level. And so what should we be asking of our hubs? We should be asking for them to be something that has native applications that allows you to run, extend the use of the tool without getting into integrating between two fully independent systems. And so we mentioned the App Exchange earlier. We mentioned Parsley for resume parsing. That's it's part of the App Exchange, which is a different thing than saying System X integrates with System Y. It's much more like the App Store on your phone, where it's all built for Salesforce specifically. And so most of the time, you can just bring those tools in and use them right away,
Right.
versus trying to match databases, which is always tough.
Well, it's that native integration
Yeah.
versus the API customization,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
I've been parts of both of them, right? When you
Yeah.
have that API customization, it's good, but anything changes in your process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything changes, you want to restructure anything. You want to rejigger sort of the way that the desk setup is. You want to
Yep.
increase your capacity. You want to open up a new location. You want to add another vertical. All of those things require you to go back to the source in order
Yep.
to re-customize,
Yep.
not quite from scratch, but kind of rebuilding.
Yeah.
Whereas those native integrations that are already in place, that already play well with others in the sandbox, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
share their toys.
Yep.
Those are the ones where you can amend them as you go and grow, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Much more easy, to do that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is, customizability. I think that's a word. Yes.
We'll add it.
Of the tool, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that there's kind of this misconception that Salesforce is only for the big companies out there, because if you look at all the biggest staffing firms in the industry, the vast majority use Salesforce. And so I think there's this perception that, hey, it's only for the big guys. Here's what I've discovered, and it's actually been a fascinating journey for me. So I was in the world of IT recruiting, so and business analysts and project managers and that kind of thing. And so when I started Helpstone and I started just helping staffing in general, there are so many verticals out there, of course, that the staffing industry serves. It's just been it's been a fascinating journey. I mean, I have a client that just places medical device salespeople. That's
That's
all
it.
that's all they do. And so what I've discovered is that there's quite a bit of nuance to how almost everyone does business. Yeah, I mean, everyone has this, that everyone has jobs or positions or searches or whatever they want to call them, and everyone has candidates. So there's some things that don't change, but there's also really specific ways that people want to do business. And what I love about Salesforce is that you can actually almost 100% of the time make the tool do what you want it to do rather than working around it and creating another spreadsheet. And really take your unique business and inject it into the tool. And I think that's a big deal, like a
Like
really big deal.
let your proprietary model be the model versus having it amend to whatever the software is.
Yeah, yeah,
Understood.
yeah. It's awesome. I mean, I had this is not necessarily a model thing, but just a quick story is I had a situation during the height of COVID where a client wanted to bring in a bunch of people to help clean up their database and align it and everything. And so I was able to build ways to track that inside of Salesforce for this little skunkworks project and keep everything organized for a really unique situation inside of like a day or two, and
wow.
make sure that was managed and effective and all those kind of things. And so, but models change all the time. I mean, I think the last couple of years have taught us models can change overnight. And
Drastically.
yeah, and so not being backed into a corner with a tool that was built for one model and kind of built by someone else, like you can't alter it. That's a big deal. Like that flexibility is a huge deal, I think.
Great segue. It's almost as though, you had this in mind, but like, so how can staffing agencies assess the limiting factors of their given ATS? Like they've obviously, many have, well, you've got varying degrees, but you've got people who have been in business for, 1 year or, 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they've amended their process and they've obviously built out many of the structures that they have. But I feel like a lot of firms have sort of grown accustomed to being disappointed
Mm-hmm.
in the hub that they have. Like
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of accept it as being the evil they know versus the one that they don't.
Yeah.
But how should staffing firms be assessing the limiting factors of the ATS?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, and a little tongue in cheek, but like, how many spreadsheets do you have? For real. Like,
Yeah.
if you're drowning in spreadsheets, your ATS is not being very effective.
Right.
Um, and running a business out of spreadsheets is not a good idea,
Yeah.
for numerous reasons. And so, so as silly as it is, that's one huge way to know that it's holding you back in some way.
And
Um,
let's just for a quick second, right?
yeah.
Like, so why aren't spreadsheets good? Like, should we just hit that
Mm,
for just a quick
mm,
moment? Like
yeah.
manual entry, lack of accuracy, right?
Hmm.
Like, I
Hmm.
mean, this is just not a good space to be,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
like
I mean, I
fragmented.
love, yeah, I love spreadsheets. I mean, everyone does, right? Because it's easy. You just put the information in, and you move on.
Sure.
But they're not multidimensional,
Yeah.
so you can't connect one person, let's say a candidate, to multiple jobs if
Right.
you're
So
like
less
tracking that kind of thing.
transparency.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're going to enter, it's you have, rows and columns, so it's not a database, at the very basic structure. The other big thing is you can't validate data, you can't require data, and so your data quality is almost always poor.
Mm,
And there's very little you can usually do around automation unless you get really sophisticated with it. But again, then
right.
why, let's put that into better use and put that on a platform, and
And
you know
to that point, even if you got sophisticated with it, you're getting sophisticated with a very fragile concept. Like
right.
you just
Oh,
talked about like custom APIs and how fragile that is, and that's with an
yeah.
API integration.
Right.
Getting sophisticated with a spreadsheet. So just in case there were people that were like, I've got 500 spreadsheets and we're doing just fine, like just to sort of like compartmentalize that piece. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so talk about like I love the idea though, right? Like if you have spreadsheets, that is definitely a key indicator that you have a fragile system or that there's a
Yeah.
limiting factor to your ATS. What
Yeah.
other bits should they be considering?
Yeah, I think it's also, and maybe a lot of these are kind of like soft edge things, but like if you're in a lot of meetings and you're like, well, we would do that, but we can't, or you're constantly waiting. Let's say you do want to do something new and different, and you're constantly waiting for your software vendor to give you an update on
Sure.
on that thing. Like they're like, oh yeah, it's on the roadmap. It's 6 months from now. It's like, well, but I want this now, but and so if you're bumping your head on that kind of stuff quite a bit, that would be another indicator.
Okay.
um if you happen to have, I mean, many ATSs out there are quite connected, so I mean, I mean, I realize Salesforce isn't the only game in town. But if you are running into a situation where you do want to, let's say, aggregate jobs through a Broadbean or Itabu, or a tool like that, or you want to, do some other, use staffing referrals and integrate that into your system, um, I'm just, thinking of different automation tools out there, interesting tools that are on the marketplace right now. If you're running into the fact that your tool doesn't integrate with those things
Right.
over and over and over again, that would be another indicator that you need to move to a better platform, one that's more ubiquitous, one that's more connected. And so, to be clear, I guess I am a systems guy. I'm not just a Salesforce guy.
Sure.
And so I'm just a believer in good platforms. There's
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
good platforms out there, but I do think Salesforce is one of the most extensible, most customizable. It's a great Lego set, like I said.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think too, like if you find yourself doing a lot of gut checks, you're like,
Hmm.
we we think this is how it goes. Like
Yeah.
if you don't have the data to support it, you're lacking the transparency to be able to make decisions, and you're
Yep.
really relying on like how it feels.
Yeah.
Would probably also be.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe to riff on that for 1 second, like, if you don't have good insight into your business day to day,
Mm,
from your system, you need to reassess,
yeah,
So, for our clients, even like we drink our own medicine at Helpstone, so we use Salesforce to manage what we do. And, I can tell you our, financial performance down to the, penny right now by going and looking at the system
sure.
for this month, for this day, and be able to slice and dice that different ways to help me make decisions as a business owner. And that should be the same way with your system. Is that if you don't have that insight, either as an owner or a manager, to know which lever to pull,
Right.
that would be a good indicator that you need to at least think about maybe taking what you have and making it better to get
Sure.
there, or looking at a different platform, because it's a big deal. Like, even seasonality, I found in staffing, and of course the last year or so has been just like hair on fire. You
Right.
know,
Right.
there is
Definitely
no
not model.
there's no seasonality anymore. It's just like everyone's crazy all the time. But going back in time, and I'm sure we'll at some point, get back to an equilibrium where, where you have more hiring in the spring and the fall, and then the summer and the winter are a little bit slower. I mean, depending on the industry, of course.
Mhm.
Um, and so as a manager, it's really important to know when to freak out. Like, if
Right. Right.
so if you can't look at a chart and be like, okay, last December, we only had, 10 placements as a firm. And this September we're at 9, and it's December 20th or something like that. Like, maybe it's not time to freak out.
Right.
Whereas if you're looking month over month, you're like, well, in October we had 25, so we're way down. Well,
Right. Right. Being
are,
able to
are
see your trends and
yeah,
yeah.
are you really, or is it just, seasonality? So being able to have that insight into your business is just huge.
Yeah, agreed. So let's say we have piqued people's interest. Like, let's just hypothetically speaking, right? What should staffing firms who are considering Salesforce know? Like, what should they walk into this knowing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, and I'm probably not being a good salesperson when I say this, because Salesforce is a Lego set and you can build anything, you need to have good perspective on what you want to build,
Sure.
because you can start building too much,
Hmm.
and biting off too big of a chunk. And so so it's really really important to have, um, you know know what your business processes are. Make sure that they're clean, before you start building on top of it, because we can, we are, the collective we, in the Salesforce community can, we can make the system do what you want it to do. But if there's not clarity around what we want it to do, that's a big deal.
And then
Um,
and I'm sure Helpstone has, you guys have recipes at this point. I mean, you're 5 years
yes,
in, so you
yes,
probably have best practice recipes that'll help kind of like give people blocks or chunks to be able to work through and be able to
yes.
sort of insert their process.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're building a what we're calling an accelerator product, which is a which is a consulting product basically that does just that. It takes all the best practices we've, discovered and uncovered, over the time of the work that we've been doing, and, allows clients to kind of narrow down the field of vision a little bit and
Sure.
say, okay, specifically, here's a decision we need to make. Here's a flow that we've seen work well for other people. We have like reference automation, which is a huge time saver. And that's we've built it so many times. It's like, well, we might as well, formalize it to some extent. And so then the questions come down to, well, what verbiage do you want to go out to the person that needs to give the contact information for the reference givers?
Sure.
What information do you want to go out to reference givers? How many times do you want to remind them to provide the reference before,
Before it
you
moves out, right? The
right.
granularity of like automation in those
Yep,
sequences and that.
exactly. But at least what we would do is help to say, hey, let's talk about references. Here's what we built for other people. Tell us what you like and don't like, rather than just being like, what do you want? Um, you
We can
know,
make anything.
Yep, yep. So that's a big thing. The other thing I'd mention really quickly is your data. The better your data is coming into a transition, the better off you'll be.
Of course.
So always the most difficult part of a transition between any two systems, really, it's not about Salesforce necessarily, is the data. And
Yeah.
so the cleaner you are in your current system, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out, as they say, right? All right.
Yeah.
So Salesforce does all these amazing things, as you said. Like it is the Lego set of software, and you can basically bend it to do what you'd like. What doesn't Salesforce do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a few things, and one of them, that I felt like was most prominent for kind of your average staffing company was resume parsing and viewing.
Sure.
And so that's why we built Parsley,
Hmm.
is to just have a kind of discretionary plug and play tool that does that. So Salesforce, without any add-on, can bring in a file, you can view the file, but you really can't, you can't parse it, and you can't do searches across the resume, that kind of thing. So
Sure.
so that's one thing. Another thing is job board aggregation. So with Salesforce, you can create, and hopefully this doesn't get too techy, but you can create an XML feed where
Uh-huh.
you can feed that to your website and create a job board for it. That right now would be custom work. Versus it being kind of out of the box with some of the ATSs out there, or most of them will have some sort of job board available to you the second you buy it. And so um,
In fairness, that job feed shows up in a portal that lives in a subdomain of their domain, right?
mhm,
So what they're
mhm,
really doing is ATS is typically like just as a quick edification for people. So when you have an ATS that has a jobs feed that's built in with a jobs portal, that portal is simply being branded with the elements of the client's website, the staffing firm's website,
yep,
and it sits like you might have like your staffing company dot atsname.com, but you
mhm,
don't own that traffic, you don't own that content, you don't
yep,
own that SEO, you don't own any of it.
right,
But it is a very quick plug and play that can be maneuvered with a button and can be pretty close to seamless from a user experience,
mhm,
but deeper dive, like from a marketing SEO and ownership perspective, like it's
yep.
not the most ideal situation.
Right, right. Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, actually, is that even as you were talking about that, the SEO side, I'm sure you're very curious about. So no, that's a great point. The other thing too with the job boards that come with most ATS systems is that they're only so malleable. So a lot of times what ends up happening is, yeah, you can put your logo in there, you can color it the way you want it, but as far as the actual form, or how the fields show up, even what font gets used, all that kind of thing,
Right.
it's not always super flexible.
Yeah.
So I actually, there's a shocking number of staffing firms that don't actually use the job board through the ATS. They
I
just
know.
have people apply to jobs and send in emails, with their resumes.
Yeah.
Because of that factor, I think, largely.
Yeah. No, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
So, are there any verticals that get more complicated when using Salesforce? Like, are there any like verticals that you've come across where you're like, I mean, we could do it, but it's not
Mhm.
pretty.
I think that very high volume staffing is not as ideal in Salesforce.
Okay.
Is it doable? Yes, and then there's many examples of it. But I think that the interesting thing for me about Salesforce is that it's a great relationship driven tool. So
Mm.
so it's really good at managing relationships over a period of time, both from tracking their activities to seeing how they've interacted with your brand over time, especially if you plug it into something like Pardot, that can track interactions with your website and forms you've sent out and emails and all that kind of thing. You can really get this kind of collective view of how you've interacted with the person over time. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, you have the interplay between a person being a hiring manager and being a candidate. And so as that happens over time, being able to see that threading is a big deal. And so I think it plays strongest in relationship driven recruiting, um,
Okay.
uh, and a little bit less well with high volume. But But let's talk. I mean, if you have high volume, it's not that it isn't a good fit. We would just want to talk through the details.
Sure, sure. So I have one last question for you, and I know we've gone a little bit longer than normally, but I have one last question for you. We've had a couple of conversations. I've had the benefit of being able to ask you a bunch of questions about Salesforce, and at one point in time, there was this term that came up that I need to ask you about. What is the Groculator? I don't even know if I spelled it correctly, but like, I'm dying to know, like, what's the Groculator? Like, can you please explain this to us?
Oh my gosh. Oh, the Groculator. The Groculator is you put in your ingredients up here, runs through the Groculator, and out pops a thing of value. So
Okay.
automations, I guess, is a lot of times how I think of that. So
I feel like you guys need to, like, that's going to be coined your term. Like, Helpstone will be known for like setting up the Groculator for staffing firms to be profitable.
That trademark is probably available. So
I think it's something to work on.
Sounds good.
I love it. I love it. Landon, thank you so much. I hope everybody found this super informative. If you have any questions with regards to like the idea of using Salesforce at your staffing firm and you want to dig into it a bit more, feel free to obviously reach out to Landon. Great person. He's got an amazing team of developers that can help you get through that. So Landon, thank you so much for making time today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
You bet. You bet. Coming up, we do have some more weekly bites. We are going to be talking about getting ROI out of conferences, which, it's fantastic. People go to conferences and they're like, hey, how did it go? And it's like, good. You should really be getting more out of conferences that you go to with your people, Q3 planning and more. So please stay tuned and we will have more for everyone. But again, I hope everybody had a great experience. I hope they learned something today. And Landon, thanks again for your time and hope everybody has a great week.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.